Well, now let's turn to congressional correspondent for NPR, Scott Detrow. He joins us now from Capitol Hill. Scott, can you walk us through this for Republicans? What exactly does this Alabama Senate race mean?
Well, it means, are they going to have a massive headache of one kind tomorrow morning, or are they going to have a headache of another kind? I mean, if a Democrat, Doug Jones, wins, it's a 51-49 majority in the Senate for Republicans. You've seen how hard it was to get the majorities they needed to try and repeal Obamacare. That didn't happen. To pass a tax bill, that barely happened. You're cutting their majority in half if it's Doug Jones. If it's Roy Moore, they still have a Republican vote. But then it's a question of, what does Roy Moore say? What does Roy Moore do? And you've had leaders like Mitch McConnell, like Cory Gardner, who's running their campaign efforts, saying they're going to initiate ethics investigations of Roy Moore. And they have called in the past to go as far as to try and kick him out of the Senate once he arrives. So that will be a really long headache for Senate Republicans. And the electoral question of, what does this mean if every Republican running next year is tied to Roy Moore, the candidate with all these allegations against him? You
know, you speak of these allegations. Just a short time ago at the top of this broadcast, there were more than 50 Democratic congresswomen who were asking the House Oversight Committee to look into investigating sexual misconduct by President Trump. You know, the president's accusers asked for this investigation yesterday. There was a meeting that the president dismissed the accusations, calling them false and fabricated. Do you get a sense that these calls for an investigation are a political stunt, or do you think that it could actually lead to something?
Well, unclear what it would lead to, but I think it's certainly going to highlight this in the conversation. I mean, for the last few months, you've seen this shift of high-profile man after high-profile man after high-profile man being accused of sexual misconduct, having his career destroyed, having to resign from the Senate, like Al Franken. And there's been one exception the whole time, and that's the man sitting in the Oval Office who, as you said, has been accused by more than a dozen women. And over the last few days, we've been seeing some of these accusers in the news again. We've been hearing from them. Lawmakers on the Democratic side have been talking about it more, and it's clearly getting under President Trump's skin. You saw him this morning tweeting about that, saying Democrats have now moved from Russian collusion back to these allegations. Of course, they've been out there for more than a year at this point.
And we know the president has backed Roy Moore, and you're also watching, and we've been watching closely, Steve Bannon and what he said and what he's done in this election. He's called the Alabama race a national election. If Moore wins, how do you think Bannon might weaponize him in his so-called war against the establishment?
Well, he would have a pretty big victory to point to. I mean, Bannon has been going around trying to recruit candidates to run against Republican incumbents. He has been recruiting people in a wide variety of Senate races, and Moore would be a huge accomplishment. I mean, he would be electing him twice over the wishes and money and campaigning and public statements of Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who spent money to try and defeat Moore in the primary and failed, and has now said he wants nothing to do with this campaign. So that would be a big win for Bannon, but it's unclear how much you can replicate that with a candidate like Moore in other states.
Yeah, it seems like it is a special case, but you never know. I want to ask you, though, about this feud with Democratic Senator Gillibrand and President Trump, who called her lightweight. He described her as a, quote, total flunky for Chuck Schumer, and someone who would come to my office begging for campaign contributions not so long ago. Here's what she had to say in response.
I see it as a sexist smear. I mean, that's what it is. And it's part of the president's effort at name calling. And it's not going to silence me. It's intended to silence me. It's not going to silence the women who have stood up against him directly. And it's not going to silence the millions of women out there who have been speaking out every day since his inauguration about things they disagree with.
A sexist smear, Scott. What do you make of this back and forth?
Well, you know, I think this has really angered Senator Gillibrand. It's angered other women who serve in the Senate as well. Senator Elizabeth Warren was very vocal in her response to President Trump, and she was so upset by this that she actually stopped and talked to reporters in the hallway in the Senate, which is something that Senator Warren never does, saying that these statements, these insinuations from President Trump were disgusting. It actually reminded me of something that Trump said about Mitt Romney last year during the campaign when Mitt Romney spoke out against Trump. Trump went to a rally and talked about the same thing, saying that he had endorsed Romney, he had given contributions to Romney, and he said he could have told Mitt Romney to get on his knees for those contributions. Very similar tactic in terms of how you're trying to frame someone who's publicly criticizing you. And I think it doesn't escape anything that Gillibrand had been publicly calling for Trump to resign because of these accusations in the day before he said this.
You're in the halls of Capitol Hill, Scott. I got to ask you, any progress on tax reform?
Whole lot of things happening right now that nobody's telling me about, nobody's telling other reporters about. All the process this week is behind closed doors, so we're doing our best to try and figure it out. It looks like the plan is to have a public bill again by Friday, and then very quick turnaround votes in the Senate and House early next week, Monday and Tuesday. So it'll be a lot of weekend reading of tax policy, I'm sure, if that timeline stays.
Talk about down to the wire, huh?
They want to get it done before Christmas. They seem to think they can.
All right. Scott Detrow, thank you so much for joining